Her voice slid across the dining room like a knife wrapped in velvet. "Enjoying your $500,000 trust fund?" she asked, twirling her wine glass, not even trying to hide the smirk. The silver bracelet on her wrist, our mother's, caught a shard of sunset and sent it flashing across the table, straight into my eyes. I blinked. I laughed because what else do you do when someone throws a bomb into your life and calls it a joke? "What trust fund?" I said. The way she tipped her head, I knew she wasn't joking. She wanted me to hurt. She wanted to watch. My sister, Claire, looked like a woman in a magazine. Sleek hair, white teeth, the kind of confidence that grows in rooms where people never worry about bills. I had worry carved into my bones. Rent due, car coughing, phone screen cracked like ice. "Ask Mum," she said, and sipped her wine, even though Mum wasn't here to ask. Mum was in the ground 6 months and 2 days, and I knew because I still counted my grief like breath. I put my hands under the table so she wouldn't see them shake. "Mum never told me," I said. Claire shrugged. "Maybe she thought you'd blow it on bad choices, like you always do." Bad choices. I heard the words and tasted copper. We grew up in the same little house that smelled like coffee and lemon pledge and December. We shared secrets and gum and a bathroom mirror fogged with teenage dreams. Then she turned 18 and the door to her luck swung wide. Mine never opened. "What do you mean, trust fund?" I said again. Claire tilted her phone to check a text, lids lazy with boredom. Dad set it up before he left. There it was. Dad, the man who vanished when I was 8, the man whose handwriting I memorized from 2 old birthday cards, the man I swore not to think about because thinking tasted like rust. "Dad is gone," I said. "But his money isn't," she replied. "Mum was trustee. You were supposed to get it at 25. My birthday was last Tuesday. I turned 29. I felt the room tip. "So where is it?" I whispered. Claire's smile was thin. "If you don't know, maybe it's not yours anymore." She stood, kissed the air beside my cheek, and left the bill on the table like a goodbye. I watched her leave and felt a small animal wake up in my chest. It had claws. It had teeth. It whispered, "Find out." That night, I pulled the old cedar box from the top of my closet, the one that still smelled like Mum's lavender lotion. Inside, I kept photos, report cards, a gold safety pin from the day I split my knee open on the church steps. At the bottom lay a thick envelope, yellow with time, stamped from a law office I remembered only as a place where Mom once came home pale. I slit it open with a butter knife. The paper trembled in my hand. It was a letter from a man named Whitaker, an attorney for the estate of Jonathan Hale. Dad. The date was the week before he disappeared. It said the word trust in black, clean lines. It said my name. It said, for her education, housing, and future well-being. It said $500,000 held until age 25. My mouth went dry. The letter asked Mum to sign and return. It had her signature at the bottom, small and careful, the way she always wrote, with a faint smudge where a tear might have fallen. I sat on the floor, back to the bed, and felt the dark press in around me. If the trust existed, where was it? Why had I scraped through college on grants and diner shifts while my sister wore designer shoes to prom? Why had Mom worked 2 jobs and sold her wedding china to keep the lights on when there was money with my name on it? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A picture of the same letter I held, but with a big red paid stamp across it. Then another text, "You should stop digging." The animal inside me opened its eyes. Who was this? How did they know? I called the number, straight to voicemail. I stood, knees stiff, and opened my computer. I searched the law office, Whitaker and Rowe. Same address from the letter, but listed now as permanently closed. The only link that wasn't broken was a listing for a storage auction from last year. Boxed files, no bidders. I read it twice, then drove to the address at midnight, because grief taught me that the light of day doesn't make hard things easier. The building was a sagging brick thing that smelled like old paper and rain. I pressed my forehead to the locked glass door and cupped my hands to see in. Dust, empty desks, a forgotten umbrella. I wanted to scream. I was about to step back when a shadow moved inside. I froze. The light slid on. An older man stood in the hallway, weary eyes behind wire frames. He reached the door and studied me like a stray. "We're closed," he said. "I need to know about a trust," I blurted, pulling the letter to the glass. His gaze flicked down. He unlocked the door. 10 minutes, he said, and led me through the hall that creaked like it remembered secrets. His office was a museum of tired victories, diplomas tilted in their frames, a plant gone to crisp. He read the letter. He read it again. "I'm Whittaker," he said at last, voice thin. Jonathan Hale promised many things. My heart thudded. "Did he fund it?" I asked. That was the only question that mattered. He looked at me over the paper. "Yes," he said, and then he disappeared. The room spun. "So where is it?" Whittaker rubbed his temples. "There were transfers, a consolidation when your mother got sick, a new account, different bank. I warned her to keep things separate." The animal in my chest went quiet, listening. "My mother died with nothing," I said. "She pawned her wedding ring." He flinched. Sometimes fear makes people do foolish things. "Not my mother," I snapped. "Tell me where it went." He hesitated, then slid open a drawer and pulled out an old ledger, the kind with green lines and careful numbers. He turned pages with the slow care of a priest, then tapped a line with a trembling finger. "Here." I leaned in. The payee name stared back like a mirror. Claire Hale. My throat closed. The date was the week I dropped out of grad school because I couldn't afford rent. The amount made black swim across my vision, a little over $480,000. "No," I said, but the page didn't change. "She came in with a power of attorney," he whispered. "Your mother signed it when she was first diagnosed. There were hospital bills. I assumed." "You assumed wrong," I said, and my voice sounded like someone else's, someone hard. There was a note in the margin, "Consolidate for tuition, medical." But there was no tuition. There was only Claire's sudden upgrade to a luxury apartment and a new car that smelled like leather and lies. I stared at the ledger until the numbers blurred. "I need copies," I said, "everything with my name on it." Whittaker nodded slowly. "You're not the first to be hurt by money," he said, "but you can be the last." I took the papers and walked out into the cold night. The streetlights hummed like nervous teeth. My phone buzzed again. A new text. I said, "Stop." My hands were steady now. I typed back, "My turn." When I looked up, a black SUV rolled to the curb. The window slid down a few inches. I saw the gleam of a bracelet I knew too well. "Get in," my sister said. I slid into the back seat and the door thumped shut like a vault ceiling. The air smelled like leather and Claire's perfume, the expensive kind that clings and won't let go. She didn't look at me right away. Her eyes flicked to the driver in the mirror, a square man with a neck like a tree stump, then to the street where rain began to pin the city down, needle by needle. "You shouldn't go to Whittaker," she said, voice low, cool, practiced. "He's a ghost clinging to a dead file." I held the folder to my chest like it could warm me. "A ghost who keeps receipts." She smiled, but it was more like a stretch of teeth. "You always did love a good story, trust funds, secret ledgers, maybe next, Dad's alive and living in Cuba." The driver eased us into traffic as if no one in the car could bleed. My knee bounced. I locked it still. "Why did you take it?" I asked. Not a yell, a question with an edge. Claire finally turned, hair perfect, lipstick perfect, everything perfect, like my anger didn't reach her. "I saved us," she said. "Saved you." She said it like a prayer and a punch. "By draining the money that had my name on it." "It had Mom's signature on it," she said, and something in me cracked. "She was sick," I said. "She wouldn't know a cheque from a church bulletin by then." A shadow flickered across her careful face. You weren't there when she woke in the night thinking the lamp was the moon and the floor was water. You weren't there when the hospital called and said, "We need a card on file. Rent or chemo, which do you choose?" I swallowed. I was there, I said, barely. I was there, but I was also working 2 shifts and sleeping in parking lots between classes. I was there, but not enough. Guilt crawled up my spine with cold hands. Claire watched it take hold. "Mum was drowning," she said. "I threw money at the flood." "Then why did your apartment get bigger?" I asked. "Why did your car get newer? Why did I sell blood plasma while you wore diamonds?" The driver's eyes clicked to the mirror, then away. Claire's chin lifted. "Because survival looks different when you do it right." She reached for my hand and I pulled back. Her smile faltered. "There was more than hospital bills," I said. 480,000 doesn't vanish into copays. "You think you can do long division on grief?" she snapped, and for a second the polish slipped. I saw the girl who once curled up with me under a blanket on storm nights, counting between flashes and thunder to measure the space between fear and the hit. "You think I didn't watch Mum fade at the edges and decide I couldn't afford to fade too?" She flipped open her phone, scrolled, held the screen out. Photos. Mum in a headscarf. Mum asleep with an IV. Mum smiling without teeth because life had taken them in fees. "I paid," Claire said. "I paid in ways money never covers." My throat burned. So did I. The SUV turned down a narrow side street where the streetlights hummed and the puddles held the city upside down. We stopped outside a low building with frosted windows and a brass plaque that caught the rain like glitter. "What is this?" I asked. "Where the drizzle ends," she said, and opened her door. The driver got out and held an umbrella, a black flower blooming. Inside, the building was all soft carpets and soft voices, the kind of place that sells privacy by the ounce. A woman at the desk nodded. She knew Claire's face. "Conference 2, she said, and slid a key card. Claire led me down a hallway where the art looked expensive and empty. The room was colder than the hall. A glass table, 2 chairs, a kettle in the corner, whispering steam. A man rose when we entered, grey hair, grey suit, a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Miss Hale," he said to Claire. Then he looked at me. "And this must be the sister." "The beneficiary," I said, and set my folder down like a knife. He gave me a pitying glance usually reserved for lost dogs. "I'm Carlton, Estate Services." He gestured at the chairs. "Let's be civil." I stayed standing. Civil is for neighbours. "Sit," Claire said, the word tight. I sat because I needed to see how far the floor fell. Carlton slid a document across the glass. "Your mother signed a durable power of attorney," he said. "It allowed Miss Hale to make needed transfers. Everything was in order." "Needed for who?" I asked. He didn't blink. "For the family." "I'm family," I said. "Then why did I get scraps?" Carlton folded his hands. "Your mother worried about your choices." I thought of my cracked phone and my frayed sneakers and the way I hugged coupons like love letters. "My choice was to keep the lights on," I said. Her choice should have been to tell me the truth. "She was afraid," Claire said softly. "Afraid you'd run." "Run where?" I asked. "There's nowhere to run when you're broke." I opened my folder and slid Whitaker's ledger copy to Carlton. His pupil twitched when he saw the numbers. "You used a trustee account as your personal wallet," I said to Claire. "That's a crime dressed in a silk dress." She flinched, the smallest tell, but I saw it. Carlton's smile faded. "We can discuss restitution," he said, like he was offering lemonade. I leaned forward until he could see the crack in my calm. "I want the full amount with interest. I want an accounting. I want the bank statements, the dates, the signatures, the shape of every lie." "Be reasonable," he said. "I am," I said. "Reasonable would be police." The kettle clicked off. The room went very quiet. Rain whispered at the window like 1,000 distant hands. Claire spoke first. You won't call the police, she said. You won't drag Mum's name through mud. You won't put me on the evening news because your heart is too full and too weak. She tilted her head, knowing me. You still sleep with the light on. The hit landed. Shame flared hot. I thought of night terrors after Mum died, of waking to a dark that felt like a mouth. I stared at the table until the flare cooled to coals. I'll do what I have to, I said. Carlton spread his hands. We can settle, not 500. Funds were spent, medical, legal, consolidations. How much? I asked. He named a number that felt like a slap, small, careful, designed to make me swallow my anger and sign. No, I said, double. Claire's mouth opened. Carlton's jaw tightened. You're not in a position to demand, he said. I'm in the only position that matters, I said, the one with the truth. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, snapped the documents on the table one by one. Carlton stood. You cannot. I can, I said, and I can send them to everyone who ever loved Mom and everyone who ever loved you. I can make your name taste like pennies. I turned to Claire. Give me what's mine, and I'll let you keep what's yours. Your image, your story, your curated life. Don't, and I make a new story. For a long time, no one breathed. Then Claire's shoulders slumped like the scaffolding failed. Leave us, she said to Carlton. He hesitated, then walked out, the door whispering shut behind him. Claire stared at the rain-smeared window, then at me. The hard shine was gone. She was just my sister again for a beat, the one who once braided my hair and whispered that monsters were only shadows. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said, voice low. It never is, I said, but here we are. She rubbed her wrist where the bracelet sat, our mother's silver moon. I'll get you the money, she said. Not all at once, I can't. Prove it, I said. Open your accounts, show me the bones. Then we set a plan, written, notarized. She laughed one sharp breath. You learned fast. I learned the hard way, I said. The door opened a crack. The driver stuck his head in. Everything okay? Fine, Claire snapped. He withdrew. She looked back at me, eyes bright with a wet she would not let fall. You'll never forgive me, she said. Maybe not, I said. But I might understand you someday. That's the closest I can offer. She nodded once, a cut. I'll text you tomorrow. Bank, times, you show or you don't, but don't you ever threaten me again. Don't give me a reason, I said, and stood, the folder under my arm, my heart in a new shape I didn't recognize. Outside, the rain had slowed, the city washed raw. I walked alone, past puddles that held broken pieces of light, and I thought about Mum's name like a bell I could ring or bury. The texts buzzed in my pocket, unknown numbers, old friends, the landlord, but I let them all throb unanswered. Above me, the clouds pulled apart. A slice of moon stared down, thin and honest. I promised it and myself that I would not stop until the promise on that old paper breathed again, in my name and no one else's. Morning came like a bruise that wouldn't fade, a dull ache behind the eyes, the kind that makes coffee taste like apology. And while the city yawned itself awake, I sat at my tiny kitchen table with the folder open and my phone face down like a sleeping snake, telling myself to breathe and not to check for the text Claire promised, telling myself that patience is a tool, not a weakness, telling myself I was not the girl who begged storms to pass, but the woman who learned to walk into rain. At 8:23, the phone buzzed, and I let it buzz again and again until the counter hummed, then flipped it and read her message. Bank of Galen, 11 a.m, bring ID, don't be late. And beneath it, a second text from the unknown number like a cold finger at my neck. Last warning, and I stared at that all-caps threat and felt the animal in my chest lift its head, teeth bright, not afraid now but curious, because fear is noise and curiosity is a map. I pocketed both like talismans and left the apartment in clothes that said tired but trying, hair pulled back, eyes steady, because I wanted the bank to see a person who could not be smudged. The street smelled like wet metal and pastry dough from the bakery on 9th, and a bus hissed by with an ad for a vacation I would never take. And I walked the 12 blocks because walking turns nerves into heat and heat into motion. By 11, the bank's doors were a mouth of glass and brass, swallowing the poor and spitting out the rich. And inside, it was all stone and whisper, the kind of clean that costs more than any stain. And Claire was already there, crisp as a check mark, jacket the colour of money, and a smile she wore like armour. She didn't hug me, didn't ask how I slept, just nodded at the woman behind the desk, a woman with hair that didn't dare move, and a nameplate that read Harris and said, 2 for the estate room, like we were ordering a table at a restaurant where family debts get plated with garnish. Miss Harris led us past a line of tellers to a frosted door that opened into a smaller world, oval table, small camera in the corner, stale cookies pretending to be hospitality. And a man waited there in a suit that fit like a confession. He stood when we entered and said, "I'm David March, Compliance," which sounded like the name of someone who reduces people to paperwork for sport. He shook my hand, held it 1 beat too long, then handed us each a packet thick with forms that crackled like dry leaves, words that might help or hurt depending which angle you tilt them. And I read while he talked about verification and due process and safeguards to ensure the best interest of all parties. And the phrase best interest made something old and sharp scrape my ribs because people love to hide knives inside noble words. I signed where the truth would not become a trap, refused where it did, and when March's brows pinched, I said calmly, "You have my ID and Whitaker's ledger copy and the original letter naming me beneficiary." And Claire shifted like the chair had grown thorns. And I remembered how we used to sit side by side on the porch steps sharing an orange, how she'd give me the biggest slice and laugh with juice glinting on her teeth, and I wondered when generosity curdled into greed. March collected our papers and opened a laptop, fingers moving with the speed of a man accustomed to swallowing secrets, and the screen's reflection made his eyes look made of ice, and he said, "There were multiple transfers from the Jonathan Hale Trust to an account in the name of Claire Hale, authorised under a durable power of attorney executed by Margaret Hale." And hearing our mother's name felt like wind moving across a field of tall grass. 1,000 small sounds all at once, and he continued. "A portion was paid to St. Gertrude Medical Network, a portion to the IRS, a portion to Student Loan Services, a portion to a property management company, Curraway Holdings." And at that last name my pulse stuttered, because Curraway rang like a bell I couldn't place, not from hospitals or taxes or tuition, but from a night 2 years ago when Claire dragged me to an apartment warming that smelled like new, paint and champagne, a place with a view like a promise, and the host bragged about Curraway's concierge leasing, while Claire smiled the kind of smile you make when a deal clicks into place. "Show me the statements," I said, and March hesitated as if the air had thickened, then rotated the screen so I could see lines and dates and amounts arranged like a poem about hunger, and I leaned in, reading the story money tells when you force it to speak, and there it was. Deposits from the trust, withdrawals labelled interior upgrades and vehicle purchase through an affiliate that smelled like a shell, and the numbers climbed like ivy over every wall I'd ever tried to build, and beneath them a charge labelled Whitaker and Rowe, transfer fee. "You build the trust to move it out of the trust," I said, and March did not flinch, just said, "Standard." And I felt a wild laugh threaten, because nothing about any of this was standard except the way power disguises theft as policy. Claire stared at her hands, each finger a little statue, and said quietly, "I'll make it right." But before I could answer, the unknown number chimed again. "You're making a mistake," and I showed the text to March, who scanned it and said, "Do you feel unsafe?" And the stubborn part of me wanted to say no, because I refused to give fear the pleasure of hearing its own name. But I heard my mother's cautious voice in my head, how she taught me to lock doors even when daylight was still in the room. So I said, I feel watched. And March's expression softened by a degree as he slid a card across the table with a direct line and a badge number printed above his name like a thin shield. Then the door opened and Miss Harris returned with a folder embossed with the bank's crest, the kind of folder reserved for people whose problems get solved in private. And she set it down and said, "Interim restitution plan." And for a second the words felt like a sunset breaking through storm, but the numbers inside were a cloudy morning. 25,000 now. Monthly payments that could stretch to forever. Interest so low it was practically a lullaby, and I felt heat rise and knew it was anger, not victory. "No," I said, pushing the folder back. "We aren't haggling over a tip." And my voice stayed level, not loud, because steel is quieter than glass when it matters, and I turned to Claire and said, "You can do better." And watching her face shift was like watching weather change over an ocean. The small, hard lines dissolving into something rawer, something that belonged to the little girl who once tucked her allowance into my backpack with a note that said, "Don't tell Mom," and she whispered, "I can sell the car." And I said, "Good," and she said, "And the balcony furniture." And I almost smiled because of course my sister has balcony furniture that costs more than rent, and she added, "And the Curraway deposit, if, I break the lease," and March lifted a hand and said, "Penalties," and I said, "Worth it." And Claire met my eyes and nodded, because sometimes you don't need math to measure what's right. March exhaled like we were making his day difficult, drafted a new plan with numbers that didn't insult the wound, escrow language that didn't taste like ash, and I asked for a lien on the car and a consent judgment tucked into the packet like a loaded truth. And when he tried to argue, I reminded him of the camera in the corner and the unknown number that might belong to someone in this very building. And he folded with professional grace, which is still a fold. We signed, our names scratching together on paper that would outlive the moment, and Miss Harris witnessed with a flourish that said she liked tidy endings, and then it was done. Almost, because money is one kind of justice and truth another, and I still needed to know who thought they could scare me back into the small life I came from, who sent those texts and stamped paid in red across a letter I kept like a relic. Outside, the sky had turned a colour somewhere between slate and mercy, street noise rising like a tide, and Claire touched my sleeve, not a plea, just a touch, and said, "Thank you for not destroying me." And I wanted to say, "You did that to yourself," but what came out was, "Don't make me regret it," and she nodded and walked away with a posture I didn't recognise, humility wearing her like a borrowed coat. I stayed on the steps, called Whittaker from the bank's shadow, told him what we signed and what we found, and asked the question that had started to itch. "Curraway Holdings, what do you know?" And his silence stretched thin, and then broke with a name that felt like the floor shifting under old bones. "Curraway's parent company is Hale and Finch Capital," he said, "founded by your father's college roommate." And in that instant the story widened and darkened, and the horizon moved, because the past wasn't past at all. It was a hand reaching forward to rearrange the present, and the animal in my chest didn't snarl, it smiled, because at last the map had a new line to follow. Whittaker's words kept echoing as I walked, "Hale and Finch Capital, your father's roommate." And the city felt tilted, like the streets sloped toward a secret, so I followed the pull because that's what I do now. I go where the questions sharpen. I typed Hale and Finch into my phone, watched a parade of glossy websites load, all marble lobbies and tooth-white smiles, and one old article snagged my eye. A small-town newspaper scan with ink ghosts. Local alumni launch fund. A photo of two boys in cheap suits. One of them my father, hair long, grin crooked, his arms slung around a taller guy labelled Edward Finch, and my chest tightened at the sight of Dad's laugh, frozen in black and white, like joy didn't know it had an expiration date. The article listed a nay fine address Midtown that matched Curraway's parent company registry, and I stood at a corner where the light never changed fast enough and watched buses heave and pigeons strut and decided, No more waiting, no more letting other people write my ending. So I cut across traffic and took a cab, told the driver the address with a voice I barely recognised, steady, the kind people listen to. The building rose like a carved promise, glass-catching sky, chrome doors hissing open like a stage queue, and inside the lobby everything gleamed, even the plants, as if dust were beneath them, and a woman at the desk looked up with a smile trained to bloom and said, "Welcome." And I said, "Hale and Finch Capital meeting Edward Finch," like it was my right. Because it was, because everything taken from me taught me to walk as if I owned my steps. The receptionist's fingers danced, her smile didn't wobble. "Do you have an appointment?" And I said, "No, but he'll want to see me," and slid my ID under the glass, the name Hale catching light, and something shifted in her face, just a fraction, enough to betray a script's sudden rewrite. She made a call, her voice dropped, eyes flicked, then she pointed at a bank of elevators and said, 42nd, and I thanked her like a woman who expects doors to open. The elevator hummed up, numbers blooming, and my reflection looked back from the brushed steel, tired eyes, set jaw, a mouth that had learned to keep from trembling. And when the doors parted, I stepped into a hallway cool as winter, art that wanted to be expensive when it grew up, and a man waited by double glass doors, mid-50s, trim, suit charcoal as a threat, eyes doing math, hand extended before he finished smiling. "Ms. Hale, I'm Edward Finch," and I took the hand, felt old power in the grip, a handshake that wanted to remind me who owned the air. His office was a movie set, shelves of unread books, a view that made the river look obedient, a bar cart with amber secrets, and he gestured toward a leather chair. But I stayed standing, because sitting felt like surrender. "Your father was the bravest person I knew," he said, voice dipped in nostalgia, and I tasted metal. He believed money could be a force for good, and I said, "He believed enough to leave," and the flicker behind his eyes said I'd drawn blood. He moved to the window, making the city small with his back. "Jonathan had demons," he said, like that absolved anything. "He made choices," and I said, "He made a trust for me, and someone made it disappear." And I let the word "someone" hang like a noose, and Finch turned, hands in pockets, everything casual but the jaw. "You've been speaking with Whittaker," and I nodded, and he said, "That man clings to the past as if nostalgia pays interest," and I said, "Maybe the past still owes me," and took out my phone, opened the photos of statements, let their numbers flash across the glass of his desk. He didn't lean in, didn't flinch, just studied me as if I were a volatile stock he might short. "Claire has agreed to restitution," I said, "but the trail winds through Curraway, through you," and his smile was soft and winter cold. "Curraway is one of many holdings," he said. "We provide housing, jobs." And I barked a laugh, not loud, sharp. "You provide stories." And I lifted the screen to the charge labelled interior upgrades. "You provided balcony furniture," and his eyes cooled further. "If you've come for a check, ask," he said, weary, bored, like I was a leak to be plugged. "I've come for the truth," I said. "Who sent the warnings? Who stamped paid on a letter from a dead man?" And the smallest shadow crossed his face at the word dead, and I felt a current shift. He walked to the credenza, poured water into a crystal glass as if to buy time, handed it to me like peace. I didn't take it, so he set it down, a ring of cold forming beneath. "I've protected this firm through recessions and scandals," he said. "I have no patience for melodrama," and I stepped closer. Low voice. "Neither do I." And the room went quiet enough to hear the building breathe. He exhaled, almost a laugh without humour, and said, "You think your father vanished because of money?" And the floor tilted again. "He vanished because he was tired," Finch continued. "He wanted to stop being a man people needed." And my throat closed because the words felt rehearsed, like a eulogy without a body. "He left a trust," I said. "He left a mess," Finch replied. He perched on the desk edge, confessional style. "He asked me to keep an eye on your family. I did. Your mother came to me when she got sick. We moved funds to cover what she was too proud to ask others for." And the rest? I pressed. Administrative drift, he said. Smooth, vile. Things happen when the world goes on. Things like a new car, I said. Things like threats, he said back, quick, then paused, realising he'd admitted a piece he couldn't afford. Heat climbed my chest. So you sent the texts, I said. From what, burner phones you buy in bulk with the office supplies? And he shook his head, faint smile at last. No, Ms. Hale, I don't text, I delegate. And he pressed a button on his desk. The door opened as if waiting for a cue, and the driver from the SUV stepped in. The same oak-necked man who stared at me in the mirror, now in a blazer, eyes flat. Mr. Finch, he said. Polite, almost bored, and something cold slid down my back and settled. Not fear, alignment, the feeling of puzzle pieces clicking into place. This is Mark, Finch said. Security. And the word tasted like smoke. I faced the man who thought his silence could eat me, lifted my phone, snapped his photo with a cheerful shutter sound that made Finch blink. Harassment is a crime, I said. So is intimidation. And Mark's mouth twitched. Lady, you have no idea what crime looks like. And I stepped forward until the space between us was a heartbeat. No, I said, but I know what justice feels like, and I'm getting warmer. And Finch's voice cut through. Enough! And the room stilled. He picked up a gold pen, rolled it between his fingers, considered the window, the river, the near future, then said, Your sister will pay you. Hale and Finch will add a goodwill supplement strictly confidential. And there it was, the check me box, the hush money shape of mercy. And in exchange? I asked, though I knew. You stop digging, he said. You let the dead be dead. And my mother's face came to me. The days she counted coins, the nights she whispered my name like an apology. And I thought of my father's grin in the grainy photograph, the way his arm rested heavy on a friend's shoulder, the way men promise forever and then go to ground. And I said, The dead can rest when the living stop stealing from them. And I took the pen and wrote on the back of his crisp card, the one with his name like a monument, full accounting, sworn affidavit, transfer of any assets taken under POA beyond medical and verified necessity, identify all parties who access Jonathan Hale Trust, deliver chain of custody for the paid stamp, cooperate with law enforcement if required, and I slid the card back. That's the trade. And Finch looked down, and for the first time I saw fatigue in the seams of his face, a man who'd spun plates and told himself they were halos. He nodded, slow, measured. 3 days, he said, and Mark shifted his weight because men like him don't like clocks that aren't theirs. I pocketed the card, kept my voice even. 2, and Finch's smile returned, smaller. 2 then, and the room exhaled. On the elevator down, I finally took a breath deep enough to sting, and when I stepped onto the sidewalk, the noise washed over me, cleansing, filthy, real. My phone buzzed again. One more message from the unknown number. Only it wasn't unknown now, it was a call, and the screen flashed private, and some part of me wanted to let it crawl to voicemail, but I pressed accept and said nothing. A voice came, low, familiar in a way that made my skin rise. My name spoken like a secret you keep because it keeps you. I never meant for you to be hurt, the voice said, raw, as if dragged over stone, and I swayed on the curb, heat and cold colliding, because in that syllable, in that crack, I heard my childhood, the pitch of bedtime stories, the man from the photo, older by decades but still him, and I said, breath a wire, Dad? And the line went silent except for the sound of someone breathing. And then, click. The world narrowed to the hiss of traffic and the drum of my heart as the line went dead, and I stood on the curb, gripping the phone like it might bruise, whispering his name again to the busy air. Dad and the city didn't care. The city never does. It just kept moving around me while I stared at the screen and saw my face reflected there, older than I felt, younger than my fear. And it hit me like a delayed wave that if that voice was his, then we'd been living under the shadow of a man who wasn't a ghost at all, only a coward who learned how to haunt. The anger that rose wasn't clean, it was muddy with love, that sticky old love that clings even when it should let go, and I heard my mother's tired laugh in my head, as if she were standing to my left, telling me not to chase phantoms. But I already was, legs moving before the thought, back toward the bank of elevators that ride to men like Finch, because if Dad had called now, someone had put my number in his hand, and that someone had an office where the air smelled like expensive secrets. The receptionist looked up as I came in with a face that said she'd been warned I might return, and I didn't pretend otherwise. "He called me," I said, voice level because rage behaves better when it's quiet. "From a private line." And she blinked, processed, then finally said, "Mr. Finch is in a meeting," and I said, "So am I," and brushed past her, the way being told no can become a hinge you push through with your whole body. By the time I hit the double doors, Mark was there, broad and bored again, and I hated that he was good at his job. "Back upstairs," he said, calm, and I held his gaze like a mirror. "Call him," I said. "Tell him the ghost he raises is dialing phones again." And something flickered in Mark's eyes, a glint of human under the security training, and he tipped his head toward the hallway, muttered into a mic hidden on his collar, and the doors opened like a mouth that didn't want to but had to. Finch stood behind his desk, lit by a bruised sky, and he didn't feign surprise, which is how you know a man has seen too much. You stop wasting energy on theatre. "Miss Hale," he said, as if my name were an appointment he could reschedule, and I cut him off because I was done letting men write dialogue for me. "He called me," I said, and for a heartbeat it was just the two of us, and the ghost we knew wasn't one. He looked at Mark, then at me, then at the water ring on the glass where I'd refused his piece earlier, and I watched him choose a lane. "Jonathan reached out," he said, first name like a favour. He saw movement around the trust and he panicked, and hearing my father's name in that room felt like the air got thinner. "Where is he?" I asked, and Finch gave me a look you give a cliff. Admiration, caution. "Alive is complicated," he said, and I let the words hang there until they started to stink. "You're going to stop speaking in riddles," I said softly, "or I'm going to start screaming in facts." And I took my phone out, thumb hovering over the recorder, the way leverage feels when you finally hold it. Finch sighed, the sound of a tyre slowly losing air, and he came clean in small pieces, like a man taking off a suit he wore too long. My father had left to dodge a fire of his own making, bad bets disguised as visionary bets, a fund wobbling where it should have soared, a scandal that would have dragged my mother through mud while she was busy raising daughters and counting pennies. And he'd told Finch to protect us, which in practice looked a lot like bullying the bank and shepherding money through friendly doors and answering phone calls from a sick woman with pride and a power of attorney she treated like a prayer rug. "He watched you," Finch added, and the knowing in his eyes made me cold. From far enough to believe it didn't count, and a heat started in my face that didn't know whether to be grief or rage. "He watched me sell textbooks," I said. "He watched Mum pawn her ring." And Finch didn't wince, just absorbed it like an old boxer. "He watched your sister keep you both alive the way she knew how," he said, and it was his arrogance more than his words that made me move. 2 steps forward until the desk edge pressed my thighs, and my reflection in the glass lay over the city like a promise. "You're not a priest," I said. "You don't get to absolve anyone." And he nodded once, a small, tired admission that had the shape of respect. "Where?" I asked again, and this time I didn't try to keep the tremble out. "Where is my father?" And Mark shifted, unsettled, like he could feel that something old and heavy was about to be lifted, and Finch walked to the bar cart and poured water again, but this time he drank it himself, as if hydration could help with what was coming. "He's in St. Ives," he said at last. "A rental above a fishing shop, cash, a name that's almost his." And I stared, because the specificity made it true, made it disgusting, made the world tilt until the horizon climbed the window like a slow wave. "Why now?" I asked, and Finch gave me that fast, clean look of a blade. "Because he heard that you were not the kind to be turned aside, and he believed I might be." And that admission felt like a key I hadn't asked for. "Give me the address," I said. And he hesitated a breath, a blink, saw the way the room leaned toward my side, then wrote it on a slip of paper with the gold pen he'd wanted to use as a bribe, slid it across the desk like a surrender flag. I took it, and the world snapped into an ugly focus where every step was simple if not easy. Go to the man who made me and tell him what he broke. Mark offered to arrange a car, and I almost laughed at the theatricality of being chauffeured to my father's hiding place. But the city had knives and the unknown number had teeth, so I said yes, and downstairs a black sedan waited. That wasn't the SUV, a concession to my refusal to climb back into a past I'd already escaped. The ride out of the city took an hour that felt like a long sentence, the landscape shedding glass for brick, brick for trees, the waterline appearing and widening until the road ran alongside it like a quiet promise. The driver didn't talk, which I blessed, and I watched my messages stack. Claire sending proof of a sale listing for her car, Whitaker forwarding a scan of the consent judgment filed, Ms. Harris confirming escrow, little flags of progress pinned to a map that still had a blank space labelled father. St. Ives wasn't a postcard town, thank God. It was grey and honest, boats scarred from work, seagulls sounding like gossip, and the fishing shop had a bell on the door that rang like the tired laugh of someone who's seen too much weather. An old man behind the counter looked up, saw the ache on my face, and softened the way strangers sometimes do. "Upstairs," he said, like grief has a look that becomes a passphrase, and I climbed the narrow stairs slow because my legs had forgotten steps are meant to carry. And at the landing there was a door with peeling paint and a brass number 2 and the smell of salt and old coffee. And I knocked, knuckles 3 small explosions, and waited. The pause on the other side stretched long enough to teach patience a new lesson. Then a latch clicked, and the door opened, and a man stood there who wore my face like he'd borrowed it. Older, lined, hair gone to winter, eyes that held too much blue for a lie. And he said my name, my real name, the way only people from your first life can, and something in my chest that had been wound tight since I was 8 loosened and then burned. "You left," I said, and it came out like accusation and prayer at once, and he flinched as if language could hit. "I did," he said, and his voice was the voice from the phone, the voice from bedtime, the voice from the old photo, but tired all the way through. "I thought I was protecting you," and the lie was so old it had good posture. "You were protecting yourself," I said, and stepped past him into the small room that looked like survival. The cot, the crate table, the stack of library books nobody would ever return, a kettle calmed on a hot plate. "Mum died," I said, because I wanted to see it land, and it did, a shutter falling behind his eyes, a whole house going dark. "I know," he said, and I swung back, fury finding its mark. "You know," I repeated, and he nodded like a man confessing to a lesser sin. "Finch told me when it was too late to be of use." And I laughed, a brittle sound that made the window glass ache. "He tells you everything but the part where your trust paid for balcony furniture," I said, and he went pale the way shame drains a face. "I didn't know," he said, and the words made nothing better, only made them pile up. I threw the folder on the crate table, paper slapping wood, statements like blades, and he read them. The way people read bad diagnoses, fast, then again slower, then a third time where the numbers start to hum and resolve into a tune you can't forget. "I'm sorry," he said, a small thing that should be huge and is not, and I shook my head because apology was a thimble in a flood. "You're going to do more than sorry," I said, and I told him about the plan, the escrow, the consent judgment, the goodwill money Finch had tried to whitewash, and I watched him try to stand taller than his mistakes and watched him fail, and finally he sat on the edge of the cot like a man admitting gravity. "I will sign what you need," he said. "I will testify." And a part of me wanted to say, "Keep your signatures, keep your voice," but I am practical when rage cools, so I said, "Good." And then the bell downstairs rang, and heavy steps hit the stairs. Quick, 4, 5, 6. and we both turned toward the door at the same time, my father's eyes going wide in a way that told me he had been found before and had learned to expect the worst when the steps are fast. The door swung before the last boot hit the top stair, and the frame shivered like it wanted to flee, and Mark filled the doorway with a second man at his shoulder, narrower but wired tight, eyes bright with the kind of hunger that mistakes fear for food. My father rose from the cot too fast, a hand at the small of his back, a flinch he couldn't hide, and Mark took in the room, cot, kettle, me, him, then stepped over the threshold like he owned the floorboards. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Not to me, to my father, like a boss scolding a truant employee, and something in me snapped clean, not brittle, clean, like a rope cut by a blade. "You don't give orders in a house that's not yours," I said, voice steady enough to carry weight. The second man swung the door shut and locked it. Click that sounded like a trigger pulled on quiet. I slid my hand into my pocket and typed without looking, 3 words to the number on March's badge card, Stives now, then hit send and held the phone loose like it didn't matter. Mark noticed, of course he did, men like him inventory rooms in a blink, but he let it pass because overconfidence is a drug and he was high. He flicked his chin at the papers on the crate table. "You made copies," he said. "You made threats," I answered. "We're all excellent at our hobbies." The narrow man laughed once, a bark that wanted to be a bite. "Finch is done being generous," Mark said. "You take what's offered and forget the rest." He wasn't asking. He was building a story he could live with if this went wrong. My father stepped forward, old rage creaking out of him like a door that hadn't opened in years. "She's my daughter," he said. "You speak to her like that again, and I—" "And you what?" Mark asked, amused, and the second man shifted his jacket to show the hint of metal, and I felt my stomach wobble and then harden, because fear makes a shape you can stand inside if you refuse to leave it. "You call that insurance," I said, nodding at the outline. "I call it cowardice." Mark's mouth made a thin smile. "You talk pretty for a girl who grew up counting change." "Counting taught me value," I said. "I finally learned mine." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the ghost of his breakfast on his breath, close enough to see the tiny scar at his lip, like a second mouth whispering bad advice. "Phone's on the table," he said. "Now." My father moved like he might obey, and I shook my head once, slow, eyes on Mark. "You came to a fishing town," I said, "so let me tell you about tides. They always turn." He smirked, and the second man took a step like impatience put springs in his heels. I raised my voice just enough to slip under the door and down the stairs. "Mr. Crenshaw," I called, because I'd caught the name stitched on the old man's vest downstairs, because nobody ignores their name shouted like a prayer, and silence followed thick as wool, and then the bell rang, the sound drifting up like hope with a limp, and Mark swore under his breath and moved to the door, unlocking, opening. "Everything all right?" came the old man's voice, cautious but not cowed, and I smiled because goodness wears sneakers in small towns and shows up even when it's not invited. "Fine," Mark lied, and slammed, locked again, turned back, only the rhythm was broken now, the scene corrupted. "You're going to sign our NDA," he said, "and you're going to leave with your father and never call Finch again." He slid a folded document from his inner pocket like a magician with a bad trick. I didn't look at it. I looked at my father. "You're going to stop hiding," I said to him. "You're going to stop letting men like him use your name like a key to open rooms where things go missing." He stared at me, and I watched shame turn into a kind of bravery that doesn't strut. It lowers its head and takes the step anyway. "He's right," my father said, nodding at me, not Mark. "I'm done." Mark's gaze cooled. "No," he said. "You were done when you left. This is clean-up." He reached for me then, a quick movement meant to surprise, but survival taught me choreography. I pivoted, slipped, let his hand catch only air and the memory of heat, and in the same motion I hit call on March's card, speaker on. The phone rang once, twice, and then the voice that belongs to men who show up said, "March," and I didn't bother with preamble. 2 men, one armed, unlawful coercion at a private residence, St. Ives Fishing, apartment 2. I said cleanly, because clarity can be a weapon, and Mark lunged. The second man moved with him, grabbing for my wrist, and my father intercepted. Older bones against younger, the clash sharp enough to make the kettle rattle on the hot plate. We tangled, we scraped, a chair went down, and in the chaos March's voice cut through. Units en route, stay on the line. And the bell downstairs rang again, multiple times now. A frantic choir, footsteps, voices, neighbours, customers, curiosity with boots, pressure building on the other side of the door. Mark cursed and made a decision. He always would, that was his job, and the decision was to end this fast. He shoved my father hard enough to pin him to the wall, forearm against throat. The second man grabbed my phone, and I let him because I had already made the most important call. "Sign it," Mark said. The paper crumpled now, cheap. Everything about him suddenly cheap. The suit, the threat, the bluster. Or he leaves here not breathing. You never know what kind of person you are until the movie in your head gets replaced by someone else's. I saw my mother's face, the way she'd look at me after a long shift, eyes saying I'm here even when everything else said I'm not. I saw Claire as a girl, hair tangled, offering me the bigger slice of orange. I saw the ledger, the bank room, the river view, the balcony furniture. I saw the picture of 2 boys, one of them my father, grinning at a future he thought would be kind, and I saw my own hands, steady. "No," I said. "You won't kill a man for a signature when half the town is at the door and the police are on their way." The second man hesitated. That single human hitch when reality intrudes. Mark's eyes flicked to the window, the door, the phone, the ceiling, calculating exits. Sirens, faint at first, then louder, thin and relentless as a wire pulled tight. "We walk," Mark said to his partner, and just like that he dropped the paper, dropped my father, dropped the mask. He moved to the door, unlocked, swung it wide into a hallway crowded with concern. He put his badge face on, the ones security men practice in mirrors. "All good," he said to the old man, to the curious, to the world. "Wrong address." They threaded through bodies like knives through cloth and were gone by the time the first cruiser screeched to a stop outside and the officer took the stairs 2 at a time, with March on speaker telling him names, roles, a narrative, statements, IDs. The small theatre of the aftermath unfolded, and I gave mine clean. My father added his, voice rough but firm. When it was over enough that the room stopped buzzing, I stepped to the window and watched the street settle. The gulls go back to gossip, the water shrug. My father sat, elbows on knees, hands dangling like surrender flags. "I thought disappearing would make you safer," he said. "It made us easy," I answered. "Easy to forget, easy to steal from." He nodded, the kind of nod that accepts a sentence without appeal. "What now?" he asked, and I surprised myself by not wanting to punish, only to finish. "Now you come home long enough to sign every page Whittaker puts in front of you," I said. "You tell the truth to anyone who asks. You apologise to Claire for leaving her to be the adult before she was 1. You apologise to me for letting me think ghosts are louder than men." He swallowed, eyes wet but holding. "I will," he said. "I will." We took the late bus back because there's something humbling and right about going home under fluorescent lights with strangers, the world too tired to pretend. Claire was waiting outside my building, hair a mess, eyes swollen, holding a brown envelope fat with receipts and a cashier's cheque. Car already gone. Balcony bare in a photo she showed me with a shaky smile. She saw him and froze, a lifetime of hope fighting a lifetime of anger, and then she broke in half and gathered herself in the same breath. "You're alive," she said without moving toward him, and he said, "I'm sorry," and she said, "You will be." And I almost laughed because the line was pure Claire, tough as old rope, soft on the inside where it counts. We went upstairs, 3 people who share a name sitting at my wobbly table, and drew a map no one taught us how to draw, restitution dates that made sense, affidavits to close the circuits, names of who owed what to whom and why. Whittaker came by with his tired briefcase and left lighter. March called to say warrants were being reviewed for intimidation and obstruction, and I thought about Mark's face when the sirens crested and understood a small thing about power. It sounds like inevitability until it hears a louder sound. Toward midnight, the city thinned to whispers, and the animal in my chest curled up and finally slept. I walked my father to the door, looked at the lines grief had carved into him, and the hollow where his hope used to sit, and I didn't forgive him. Not then, not yet. Forgiveness is a country you reach by walking, not a flight you book because you're tired. But I let him hug me, and I let myself hug back, and that was enough for one night. When the door closed, Claire leaned on the frame, eyes shining. "We're going to be okay," she said. I wanted to argue about definitions, about debts, but the word felt like a bridge we could stand on together. "Yeah," I said. "We are." I cleaned the table, lined the documents in a neat stack, and opened the window to the October air, sharp and honest. Down on the street a woman laughed, a short, sudden sound that made me smile. I pressed my palms to the sill and felt the cool paint, and remembered the first night this began. The flash of Mum's bracelet on Claire's wrist, the word trust landing in my lap like a hot coal. I had carried it, I had burned, and I had not dropped it. And tomorrow, when I told this story into a microphone and sent it into the world, I would tell it the way it happened, dark and messy and real, with a spine made of choices and a heart that refused to harden into stone.